The big toe. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good hard jerk, and it came off in his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe into the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup, and we'll have it for supper." That night, his father carved the toe into 3 pieces, and they each had a piece. Then they did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed. The boy fell asleep at once, but in the middle of the night, a sound awakened him. It was something out in the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. When the boy heard that, he got very scared, but he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It'll never find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. The boy pulled the blanket over his head and closed his eyes. "I'll go to sleep," he thought. "When I wake up, it'll be gone." But soon he heard the back door open, and again he heard the voice. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps move through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall. Then slowly they climbed the stairs. Closer and closer they came. Soon they were in the upstairs hall. Now they were outside his door. "Where is my toe?" the voice groaned. His door opened. Shaking with fear, he listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark towards his bed. Then they stopped. "Where is my toe?" the voice groaned. "You've got it!" The big toe also has another ending. When the boy hears the voice calling for its toe, he finds a strange-looking creature up inside the chimney. The boy is so frightened, he can't move. He just stands there and stares at it. Finally, he asks, What you got such big eyes for?" And the creature answers, "To look you through and through." "What you got such big claws for?" "To scratch up your grave." "What you got such a big mouth for?" "To swallow you whole." "What you got such sharp teeth for?" "To chomp your bones." The walk. My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who was also walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle, and my uncle was very scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and they came to a big woods. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was really scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was terrible scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terrible scared of him. What do you come for? There was an old woman who lived all by herself, and she was very lonely. Sitting in the kitchen one night, she said, "Oh, I wish I had some company." No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet from which the flesh had rotted. The old woman's eyes bulged with terror. Then 2 legs dropped to the hearth and attached themselves to the feet. Then a body tumbled down. Then 2 arms and a man's head. As the old woman watched, the parts came together into a great gangling man. The man danced around and around the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped, and he looked her in the eyes. "What do you come for?" she asked in a small voice that shriveled and shook. "What do I come for?" he said. "I come
for you."
Untitled Walker. There was a haunted house where every night a bloody head fell down the chimney. At least that's what people said, so nobody would stay there overnight. Then a rich man offered $200 to whoever would do it, and this boy said he would try if he could have his dog with him. So it was all settled. The very next night, the boy went to the house with his dog. To make it more cheerful, he started a fire in the fireplace. Then he sat in front of the fire and waited, and his dog waited with him. For a while, nothing happened. But a little after midnight, he heard someone singing softly and sadly off in the woods. The singing sounded something like this.
Mitai Doti Walker.
It's just somebody singing, the boy told himself, but he was frightened. Then his dog answered the song. Softly and sadly, it sang,
Lynchy, kinchy, collie, molly, dingo, dingo.
The boy could not believe his ears. His dog had never uttered a word before. Then, a few minutes later, he heard the singing again. Now it was closer and louder. But the words were still the same.
Mitai Doti Walker.
This time, the boy tried to stop his dog from answering. He was afraid that whoever was singing would hear it and come after them. But his dog paid no attention, and again it sang,
Lynchy, kinchy, collie, molly, dingo, dingo.
A half hour later, the boy heard the singing again. Now it was in the backyard, and the song was the same.
Mitai Doti Walker.
Again, the boy tried to keep his dog quiet, but the dog sang louder than ever.
Lynchy, kinchy, collie, molly, dingo, dingo.
Soon the boy heard singing again. Now it was coming down the chimney.
Mitai Doti Walker.
The dog sang right back.
Lynchy, kinchy, collie, molly, dingo, dingo.
Suddenly, a bloody head fell out of the chimney. It missed the fire and landed right next to the dog. The dog took one look and fell over, dead from fright. The head turned and stared at the boy. Slowly, it opened its mouth and... A man who lived in Leeds. There was a man who lived in Leeds. He filled his garden full of seeds. And when those seeds began to grow, it was like a garden filled with snow. And when the snow began to melt, it was like a ship without a belt. And when that ship began to sail, it was like a bird without a tail. And when that bird began to fly, it was like an eagle in the sky. And when that sky began to roar, it was like a lion at my door. And when that door began to crack, it was like a penknife in my back. And when my back began to bleed, I was dead, dead, dead indeed. Old woman, all skin and bone. There was an old woman, all skin and bone, who lived near the graveyard all alone. Ooh, ooh, ooh. She thought that she'd go to church one day to hear the parson preach and pray. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And when she came to the church house still, she thought she'd stop and rest a while. Ooh, ooh, ooh. When she came up to the door, she thought she'd stop and rest some more. Ooh, ooh, ooh. But when she turned and looked around, she saw a corpse upon the ground. Ooh, ooh, ooh. From its nose down to its chin, the worms crawled out, the worms crawled in. Ooh, ooh, ooh. The woman to the preacher said, "Shall I look like that when I am dead?" Ooh, ooh, ooh. The preacher to the woman said, "You'll look like that when you are dead." The Thing. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together. On this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office talking about one thing and another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Suddenly, they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark, it was hard to tell for sure. Then it was gone. But soon it appeared again. It walked halfway across the road, then turned around and went back into the field. Then it came out a third time and started towards them. By now, Ted and Sam were scared. They started running. But when they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon they saw it, for it was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. Sam says, "I'm going to try and touch it. Then we'll know if it's real." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes sunk deep in its head. It looked like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed. And again he and Sam ran, but this time the skeleton followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it. It stayed out in the road for a while, then it disappeared. A year later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam sat up with him every night. The night Ted died, Sam said he looked just like the skeleton. Cold as clay. A farmer had a daughter for whom he cared more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim, but the farmer did not think Jim was good enough for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the country. Soon after she left, Jim got sick and he wasted away and died. Everyone said he died of a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death. He could not tell his daughter what had happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life they might have had together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on her uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "Your father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." "Is there anything wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things and they left. She rode behind him, clinging to his waist. Soon he complained of a headache. "It aches something terrible," he told her. She put her hand on his forehead. "Why, you are as cold as clay," she said. "I hope you are not ill." And she wrapped her handkerchief around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. Her father was startled to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable to look for them. The horse was there. It was covered with sweat and trembling with fear, but there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, her father told her the truth about Jim's death, then quickly went to see Jim's parents. They decided to open his grave. The corpse was in its coffin, but around its head, they found the girl's handkerchief. The White Wolf. The timber wolves around French Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmers could not stop them from killing their cattle and sheep, so the state put out a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt he turned in. A butcher in town named Bill Williams thought that was pretty good money. He stopped working as a butcher and started killing wolves. He was good at it. Every year, he killed over 500 of them. That came to more than $5,000. It was quite a bit of money in those days. After 4 or 5 years, Bill had killed so many wolves that there were hardly any left in the area, so he retired, and he vowed to never harm another wolf because wolves had made him rich. Then one day a farmer reported that a white wolf had killed 2 of his sheep. He had shot at it and hit it, but the bullets didn't have any effect. Soon that wolf had been seen all over the countryside, killing and running, but nobody could stop it. One night it came into Bill's yard and killed his pet cow. Bill forgot about his decision to never harm another wolf. He went into town that next morning and bought a young lamb for bait. He took it into the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down under another tree. With his gun in his lap, he waited. When Bill didn't come back, his friends started looking for him. Finally, they found a lamb. It was still tied to a tree. It was hungry, but it was alive. Then they found Bill. He was still sitting against the other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open. There were no signs of a struggle. His gun hadn't been fired, and there were no tracks in the soil around him. As for the white wolf, it was never seen again. The Haunted House. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house. Went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar. Walking back and forth, back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back, easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book in the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking up again, and step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly. Step, 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 closer and closer. Step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand and to lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here one more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can take it all to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down towards the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. He did, and he found a big sack of money. And where that haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did come out.